You should choose your vaccines like you should choose your favorite beer. The best beer is the one that is in front of you.
And welcome back to the Fun Time program. I am your host, John Andrew Fredrickson, here with my beautiful co-host,
Vivica Volt.
And today we are talking about vaccines. It's the big topic that's on everybody's mind right now because finally, after almost a year with this nonsense, we have a vaccine, multiple vaccines. We have light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
But still, not everybody's on board.
This is unsurprising, though, because, I mean, there have been plenty of people who were against vaccines for plenty of other diseases, including vaccines that have been proven to work for years and generations. But, But
it's so funny because I grew up, and we're gonna jump into this in a minute. I grew up actually without getting vaccinated until my late 20s.
Before...
I know we're gonna get there. We have a guest today. We're gonna introduce in 1 second, but just to lay the groundwork here, I've had to do my own research on vaccines and make my own decisions later in life, and I understand why people are concerned about it. But the funny thing that I always notice with vaccines is that we didn't really have to face any of these diseases in our daily life, right? Sure. Polio, something of the past. Measles, Nobody gets measles until we just recently had an outbreak, right? But yeah, it wasn't something that you saw in your daily life. So I thought that COVID was going to be the chance for people to be like, oh my God, thank God for vaccines. It's the only reason we live in a world where we don't have to worry about these diseases. And yet that's not true. Some people are still on the fence. Yeah. So because some people are still on the fence, we've been doing a lot of research. I came across a gentleman by the name of Edward Nirenberg on Twitter. He has an amazing blog called Deplatform Go check it out, you guys, if you're interested in learning more about vaccines and what we need to know about the vaccines here with COVID. But we have him here on the Zoom today. Edward, how are you doing today?
Welcome.
I'm really good. Thanks for having me.
Where are you joining us from?
New York City.
Oh my God,
we're home city.
We're over the river in Brooklyn. We're in Williamsburg.
Oh, I'm in Staten Island.
Okay.
Nice.
Over the other river.
So you're in Imagination Land. You're in the one borough that I am firmly convinced doesn't actually exist.
Have you never been to Staten Island?
Oh, I've been there. Okay. I've been there.
Let's not hate on Staten Island today. Let's welcome our guest.
It's been a very interesting experience to live here during a pandemic. I'll say that much.
Yeah.
Are you from there? Did you grow up there?
Basically, I moved here when I was about 7. Before that, I lived in Queens in Jackson Heights.
Oh,
wow,
nice.
You're a New Yorker full time. I love it. That is so cool. Well, when this whole nonsense is over, we're going to get you back here in the studio and do a proper interview in person. That is so exciting.
That sounds really cool.
So tell us about your experience in researching vaccines. What led you to start the blog Deplatform Disease, and what is that title? I love that title.
I made the blog after I had actually a few years of experience advocating for vaccines under my belt. Initially, I was just kind of wondering about public health and just like wanted basic reminders, like get my flu shot. Don't forget this vaccine. Don't forget that vaccine. So I liked the CDC's page on Facebook. And I started seeing those reminders and I was like, cool, that's what I signed up for. And then I looked through the comments and it's this absolute fire hosing deluge of anti-vaccine propaganda. And I was like, whoa, hold on. This doesn't make any sense. Really, really just not only just false things, but like very mean false things, like claims that the pertussis vaccine, which is part of standard of care in pregnancy, is going to cause abortions in pregnant women, which is really, really horrible and absolutely baseless. And also same thing for the influenza vaccine. And I was like, this just doesn't make sense. So I was like, well, I can't just let this misinformation sit there, right? Like I have a background in this. I can explain away some of these misconceptions. Maybe if I just do that, people will listen. And boy, was that naive. Oh my God. Oh, no.
So what you're saying is you've never heard the idiom, never go to the comments section? Like never read the comments. You're never supposed to read the comments.
Well, I knew that, but I figured, I'll be well-intentioned, polite, present the information. People will understand the error of their ways. It's just like maybe they've had bad experiences with the medical system or with scientists or with science teachers, and that led them to distrust it. Maybe they just need someone nice and patient who's willing to go through it with them. And then I was immediately called a pharma shill.
Wow. There you go. So wait, let's get that out of the way real quick. Are you being paid by big pharma to advocate for vaccines?
My bank account very much wishes, but no.
Damn it.
Bummer. When you get that check, let us know.
Yeah, I mean, if you could share it with us, what's up? Big Pharma, come through.
So many shill bucks. I'm going to send a message to Pfizer and Moderna and all these companies. They owe me so much money.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Amazing. So you started out in the comment section of places, and you started pulling together research. What led to you starting the blog?
Well, actually, so in that comment section, someone actually shared a Facebook group that was about discussing vaccines and was mostly focusing on parents who, especially new parents who are on the fence, not really sure what to make of all the information that they're getting. Like it's a really, really scary time, I think, to be a parent. Not even with respect to the pandemic, I mean, before that, just the sheer onus of responsibility that you get, especially in an age where so much information is so accessible and you're expected to take such an active role in your child's healthcare and development, it can be absolutely paralyzing, that fear of making the wrong decision. And that can sometimes lead people to choose not to choose, which is itself a choice. And that can be very dangerous when it comes to things like vaccines.
Wow. So what are the common fears that you're seeing?
The concerns that I'm seeing with the COVID vaccines are really not new concerns. It's the same exact recycled list that they always have. They always claim that they're not adequately tested. They always claim that they're going to affect fertility. They always claim that they're going to cause autoimmune diseases. They always talk about how there aren't long-term studies. They always want comparison basically of the entire vaccine schedule with a fully unvaccinated cohort to prove that it's safe, which is fundamentally a ridiculous and very unethical study, actually. It's really the same exact concerns. They're not new.
Okay. And so you found that in dealing with these concerns, you were compiling a lot of research, and that's, I assume, why you started the blog, to kind of document that research and have places to link people to? Yeah.
So initially I was like, it was like the same. It was a bunch of concerned parents. It was a really big group. I think now that group has like 50,000 members. So I was dealing with a few hundred concerned parents at a time who all were asking the same basic questions. So I was like, I'm getting kind of tired of typing all this out. Let me just start saving stuff to my notes. So I did that. And then I was like, well, surely like there are other people out there who aren't in this Facebook group who would benefit from this information. So I started thinking about ways I could make that more public. So then I started on a Medium, actually. But then I didn't like Medium because it started putting up paywalls on my posts, and that defeated the purpose because I wanted my content to be accessible to everyone. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll just make my own website. And that's when I started Deplatform Disease.
Awesome. Tell us about the title.
Well, I guess, so really on these social media platforms, we have this really big problem that they're only kind of now really starting to take action with, but you had a lot of essentially uncontrolled spreading of misinformation, not just anti-vaccine misinformation, but medicine generally. Like there were people advocating giving autistic children bleach enemas that would purportedly cure them of their autism, which is so unethical on so many levels. And it resulted in several hospitalizations. I think some kids even died. There were people advocating for parents to withhold the vitamin K shot at birth, which is perhaps the single most important intervention I shouldn't say that. It's one of the most important interventions that any child gets at birth because it prevents vitamin K deficiency bleeding, which can in newborns cause a stroke, which is terrifying.
Wow.
So anyway, I was really annoyed that these people all had this platform on social media and were basically allowed to spread this misinformation absolutely unchallenged. And it had a gigantic reach. And people talked a lot about deplatforming them. And I was like, they really are like a disease of their own in some ways. And then I thought about like how infectious diseases make use of our bodies as a platform for their needs. And I was like, you know what, we should deplatform these diseases.
Wow. I love that.
It's brilliant.
Do you think that's the right approach to take when it comes to the sort of anti-vaccine crowd, to not even give them a platform to talk, to remove them from social media? Or does that make it worse? Does that drive them underground and kind of almost legitimize some of the fears? Because part of their claim is that they're being silenced. You know what I mean? Already. Part of the claim is that there's a big conspiracy. And one of the challenges of deplatforming conspiracy theorists is that it often lends credibility to their conspiracy in their eyes.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Heidi Larson, who is maybe the world's foremost expert on vaccine hesitancy, feels rather strongly that it's a mistake. For that reason, basically, they're just going to find another platform and they're going to go even more fringe and become more insular and extremist. But at the same time, you can't ignore the fact that removing their platform at least curtails their reach a little bit. It means that fewer people who would have been susceptible to their lies are going to witness them and, potentially harm themselves, harm their children, harm public health. So I think it's a Band-Aid solution until we can get a more permanent fix.
Right. In the median time, it causes less harm overall, even if it doesn't reduce harm completely.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if giving a platform to somebody like the President of the United States to go on TV and claim that injecting bleach might be a good idea, if that kind of talk from a position of apparent authority lends credibility to some of these more obscure bleach enema things. Because, people look at this kind of stuff and they say, oh, nobody believes that. That's just Trump being Trump, right? But then you hear these stories about parents actually going home and giving their kids bleach enemas.
It is absolutely not true that no one believes it. It's not super common, but there absolutely are people who believe it. Stop Mandatory Vaccination was a Facebook group that was only relatively recently removed. It had hundreds of thousands of members, and it was really like a kind of an agora for these kinds of conspiracy theories and these claims about bleach enemas, homeopathy, any kind of vaccine refusal. It wasn't nearly as fringe as is being made to seem. And in fact, the guy who ran that group, Larry Cook, he started posting a lot of support for Trump when he started espousing these ideas about the bleach, for example, and also pulled out some of his older anti-vaccine rhetoric, where he says like the needles are gigantic and like, of course it causes autism, like that kind of thing. So it certainly is a very big issue when positions in a position of power and a position of credibility do make such claims. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. There's also the Church of Bleach, where there's a whole religion that's based around bleach being cleansing force that you should use in your daily life. You should ingest it. You should feed it to your kids. If your kids are getting sick, it's because their body hasn't acclimated to the bleach properly. It's really bad. And this is a surprisingly large following. And I know that when the president was talking about bleach on national TV, these people retweeted him and they were incredibly excited about their platform being elevated to the national level like that. And I think that's really dangerous because that only encourages them and makes them think that they're right and empowers them to keep spreading this very dangerous idea. I think it's worth noting that when you have an idea like this and a proposition that can end up being literally dangerous and harmful and cause deaths, I think it's worth having someone come in and say, hey, I know that these are someone's ideas and I know that people are trying this, but this has been scientifically proven. Here are all the ways that it's been refuted, and to not give them equal voices in the conversation, to have one very clearly be an opinion and one be a stated fact, and to not be giving those two things the same level of credence.
It's a really interesting challenge, and especially one that we feel really in the core of our souls here in the United States, because free speech is obviously so important to the founding of this country and what makes this country so great. And we tend to really be afraid to curtail speech in the hope that through airing bad ideas in the public square, we can really get to the root of it. We can really, describe why these ideas are bad. People can hear the rebuttals rather than just pushing them underground, where people are they're going to go into their own echo chambers and they're not going to hear anybody actually describing why these ideas are terrible ideas. And it's better to have them out in the open so that they can potentially hear rebuttals to these ideas. Why is that not necessarily a good idea when it comes to vaccines and public health?
I honestly think that the best answer is that people aren't good enough at it. The kind of things that resonate with people in terms of messaging are very different from often from what the experts, like the scientists, are accustomed to presenting. People will really resonate with a harrowing account from a mother, for example. It usually tends to be mothers, but not always, who talks about how her child received the MMR vaccine, and then she literally saw the light fade from their eyes and they were never the same again. And that will resonate with them much more than the fact that we have done studies on literally millions of children that show absolutely no evidence of any kind of increased risk in the development of autism in association with their vaccination status, even though that is itself a much, much stronger argument by any objective metric.
Of course, because these individual experiences are always going to be what people pay attention to. And the problem is when you take a study of millions of people, some percentage of them are going to have bad things happen to them.
Right.
And it's going to happen in the control group and it's going to happen in the testing group, which is why we do these tests. So for example, when they did the test for the COVID vaccine, I was looking at the results and when you looked at the side effects, they were describing some of these side effects like fever and chills and people getting really sick. And then you look at the side effects in the control group where people who got the placebo, they didn't get the vaccine. The same rate of side effects in the placebo group. You know what I mean? But the problem is when a mother sees their child, get the vaccine and then some small number of children are going to have some bad thing happen to them very close to the time they got the vaccine. It's just a matter of rolling the dice, right? Some kid may end up with autism and it has absolutely nothing to do with the vaccine, but the parent sees a correlation because they see the vaccine happen and then they see this negative event happen to their child. And then of course they start telling these stories and those stories proliferate. But, again, when it comes back to like the mandatory nature of vaccines, why is it necessary to make it mandatory rather than just allowing parents to make the decisions that they want to make? And if some parents want to make bad decisions for their child, why do we have to rely on the government to enforce these things? Why can't we just have some percentage of the population not vaccinated? Because I looked at the numbers right now, something like 8 to 9% of children under 3 years are not getting vaccinated today. It's only like a 91 to 92% vaccination rate right now in the country. Is that a problem or is that good enough?
That is a problem, and I'll explain that in a minute. But you actually raised a really interesting question about whether or not a mandate is necessary. I am not a huge fan of the concept of a mandate because in some cases I do think it results in more harm than good, depending on the kind of reaction that it provokes. I think I very much prefer education-based approaches, but our system isn't really geared to do that effectively. And I think that that's a major limitation. If you think about where that could happen, right? Like if you want to have parents speak to their pediatricians about these things, they have maybe 15 minutes to address all this, to answer all their questions. That's not enough time.
And then they go home and they hop on Facebook and they start getting the opposite.
And they have someone who is willing, especially a homeopathic doctor, is willing to sit down and take a lot more time and spend a lot more time with them and hear them out and give them a lot more anecdotal references. Yeah,
absolutely. So that number of 91% is not high enough. So the thing that you have to understand is that herd immunity, as we know it, is a local phenomenon. It can be 91%, but that can mean that there is a pocket somewhere where only 40% of people are immunized and elsewhere 100% of them are. Right. That pocket where only 40% of people have their vaccines is very vulnerable to an outbreak. And you really see this with the especially highly contagious infectious diseases. Like when measles starts coming back, that is a very, very big problem. That is a huge, that's a very important bellwether that your vaccine uptake is not high enough because measles is among...
You're of course familiar with the measles outbreak in Rockland County recently.
In Rockland County, that was one of them. In the one I had in my head was actually one in a Somali community in Minneapolis. In this community, Andrew Wakefield visited them. Before he came, they had among the highest vaccine uptakes in the county, I believe. And then he started spreading concerns that the vaccines caused autism. And he managed to drop the vaccination rate to, I think, 42%. And it caused an outbreak. It was devastating. I don't remember the exact cost, but some people were definitely hospitalized. I'm not sure about that. But that's all it takes. It doesn't have to be a lot of people. It just takes a small pocket.
Right.
That's interesting. So essentially what we're discussing here is the trade-off between individual rights and freedom versus sort of the rights of the collective to protect themselves from individuals who, through their free actions are causing harm to the group, right? And that's essentially what it is with not vaccinating yourself. It's saying that I'm not going to vaccinate myself because I feel that my personal freedom is greater than my responsibility to the group. And then if I become a vector for spread of the virus, the group has no right to tell me that I'm not allowed to spread this virus to other people, essentially. So you have a situation like, this group in Minneapolis where somebody comes in and starts spreading this information, and all of a sudden you have this huge outbreak of measles. And I don't know if people died in that case, but if somebody through those actions is causing people to die, is that the same as walking into a theater and yelling fire and people are dying? Like, you're not killing those people, but through your actions, you're causing people to die. And that I think is where we need to start figuring out how to draw the line between personal freedom and group responsibility. I'm
pretty sure what you just described is involuntary manslaughter.
Right.
So,
but is that something that a court would recognize? Do you know if any?
Well, I mean, the thing is, if you can prove I think that if you can prove pretty consistently that through someone's direct actions, deaths resulted, like, any court would then sustain that, okay, that is involuntary manslaughter. That is, you are literally murdering someone, whether you're doing it through your active or passive actions. Your actions contributed to the death of someone. And if it contributed to the death of multiple people, we're looking right now at the news just recently of I believe the health official that was in place in Flint when the water got poisoned, and he is now facing criminal charges. For involuntary manslaughter for that case.
Do you know if any anti-vaccine advocates have been charged?
I know that lawsuits have definitely been attempted. I think you'd have a very hard time with that kind of case in court regarding the charge of involuntary manslaughter. Mm-hmm. A really good person to ask about this would be my friend, Professor Dorit Rice. She focuses very much on the legal aspects of it. She's a professor at the UC Hastings College of the Law. She does a lot of public health law kind of things.
Nice. Okay.
That's awesome.
I can ask her and get back to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love that.
Let's talk more about some of the specific fears that people have.
Yeah.
So
sure.
What would you say is the most common fear that you hear from people?
Lately, I keep seeing resurgences back, and it waxes and wanes, but everyone seems to be concerned about what this vaccine is going to do to their fertility. And the other one I keep seeing is unknown long-term side effects.
Let's take the fertility issue first. Why are people even afraid that it affects their fertility? Is it just a general fear of I don't want my fertility to be affected, so I don't want to bring any new thing into my body that I don't fully trust? Mm-hmm. Or is there specific evidence or anything that is triggering that specific fear? Why fertility?
The anti-vaccine movement raises this concern with basically every vaccine. Actually, I think it's a little bit disingenuous to call it a concern. It's a lie. Basically, if you think about the optics of vaccine, right, you have a needle that is going into your body and feel inherently like a violation. And that resonates very strongly in a negative way for people who have high ideals of purity. And it's been found that the anti-vaccine movement does have such high ideals. So I think that's part of it. In this particular case, someone who is seemingly credible from a scientific perspective made the claim that there are shared sequences in the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, and a protein that's found in the placenta called syncytin-1 or syncytin. It's called syncytin-1. And basically, prior studies have shown that an inappropriate immune response against this protein will prevent the ability to carry a pregnancy to term, will prevent the ability to potentially to get pregnant. So naturally, that was very concerning. When you actually went and looked at these two proteins and compared them, they have about 4 amino acids in common. The spike protein is 1,273 amino acids long. Syncytin-1 is about 500 amino acids. I don't quite remember the exact length. It's really not a reasonable risk by any stretch of the imagination. Sometimes they make it a little bit easier for me because when they make concrete claims like a mechanism, I can go very easily and show this is not true. This doesn't hold water. This is where it's wrong. When they're vague about it, like it affects your fertility, I can't really do much more than say, well, there's no evidence to support that. And that's really not a satisfying answer for a lot of people.
Right.
I can understand why people, when it comes to fertility, there's not a lot of good information for parents, for example, who are struggling with fertility. They can try lots of different things, but often they don't know exactly why they're having an issue. And so in communities where people talk about problems with fertility, you often hear stories about, oh, this person just went over to here and changed their lifestyle, and all of a sudden, it was because they got away from the drinking water in their neighborhood, right? It's very easy to come up with explanations for why all of a sudden somebody had success, especially when there's this large group of people who are not having any success with any of the interventions that the medical community is able to offer. And then, so as a result, they see things like vaccines and they start hearing a story that, it could cause problems with fertility, and they're just not going to risk it because it's almost like a superstition. It's like, why risk it if I don't have to? That's interesting. So what information do we have from a scientific perspective that this isn't something that people should worry about?
Well, for one thing, even though pregnancy was an exclusion criterion for these clinical trials, meaning that pregnant women weren't supposed to be included in them, some people always do get pregnant. And in this case, that happened. So it was about an even split in both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine trials in terms of who got pregnant between the placebo and vaccine group. But it was about... I can't quite remember the exact numbers. I think in Pfizer's trial, there were about 12 pregnancies, and in Moderna's, there were about 24. And again, pretty even split among the placebo and vaccine groups. There were actually 2 cases of spontaneous abortions that happened. Both of them, however, were in the placebo group.
Interesting.
There are also several other lines of evidence that really make this unlikely. So for one thing, the spike protein is not just found in the vaccine. The spike protein is something that you are going to make an immune response against if you ever get infected with COVID-19. So by examining outcomes in pregnancy of people who are infected with SARS-CoV-2 who have COVID-19, you can show that it doesn't result in early pregnancy loss. And so far, that is what the literature supports. So even though pregnant women are, without question, very high risk for severe COVID-19 and should demand a very high level of attention and level of care, there doesn't appear to be any increased risk of early pregnancy loss, which is reassuring. In addition to that, you can actually physically look at the sequences of the spike protein and compare it against incision 1, and you will see that there's really nothing in common, very, very short stretches, but nothing close to what's needed for your immune system to make a mistake, really, and confuse the two things.
Interesting. That's so interesting. This does tend to highlight, I think, some of the fears that people have around the COVID vaccine specifically, and the studies that they've done on it. In that, when you're talking about these numbers, you're talking about 12 pregnancies and maybe a 6-6 split between the test group and the placebo group and the test group. It feels for some people that those are inadequate numbers. Like, how many people do we need to be testing to be able to say that that's actually a viable sample and that it's not just such a small sample that you can't really derive anything from the information?
Well, I would agree that that's a small number, but you have to keep in mind that pregnant women are excluded from these trials because of bioethical reasons. There are a lot of consent issues when you do a clinical trial on pregnant women because they're kind of making decision for quote unquote two people, depending on your specific views on personhood. And that's very complicated. And on top of that, because that choice affects a future potential life as well, you really want to demonstrate ahead of time that this product, this pharmaceutical, is at least safe in other groups. So that I don't think is the very strong point of evidence. I think the strongest evidence comes from the fact that in COVID-19, where you are making a huge, massive immune response far greater than anything the vaccine could do, you aren't seeing these early pregnancy losses, which you would expect if this were true. And I think in addition, the actual bioinformatics part of it is probably also very strong evidence.
Interesting. So since we don't necessarily have like super strong studies, so we haven't done, millions of people tested them and then looked at the results, although we're starting, I guess we're going to start to see some data on that. Do you know? Are they tracking people when they're vaccinating now?
It's being tracked very extensively. So. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So everyone who gets vaccinated, they can download an app on their phone called Be Safe, and they can report any symptoms that they're feeling, anything that ever goes wrong with them for monitoring purposes. In addition to that, there is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or reporting service, VAERS, which they can file reports to. It's also a passive reporting system. There are also active reporting systems where basically someone is looking at anonymized medical data and comparing what happens in vaccinated people to background rates in the population. And there are a few health institutions that are affiliated with that program that's called the Vaccine Safety Data Link. There are a bunch of systems that the CDC set up to track this. Vaccine pharmacovigilance is extremely, extremely thorough. I don't I think that it's probably more thorough than for any other type of pharmaceutical, just because it's a public health intervention. It's so trust-based.
Interesting. When it comes to fertility, though, do you know, are they recommending that pregnant women get vaccinated?
They can't make an official recommendation until a clinical trial is performed specifically in pregnant women to support that it's safe and effective. However, given the significant risks that COVID-19 poses for pregnant people, they have not barred them from receiving the vaccine. And the American College on Obstetrics and Gynecology has a document that you can use to facilitate a discussion of risks and benefits with patients. So, nice. I mean, if pregnant people want to wait, if they're not very high risk for COVID, that's probably reasonable for contracting, specifically, like if they don't work in a high risk setting.
Right.
If they feel, if they don't want to wait, I mean, it's very likely to be safe. There are, at this point, what are called developmental and reproductive toxicity studies, which are studies that we do in an animal model where we examine whether or not the vaccine has any effect on pregnancy or on the fetus or on the pup, I guess, since it's rats when they're born. And Moderna has already completed those and they showed no abnormalities. Pfizer has not publicly released those studies yet, but they verbally report no abnormalities as well. In general, I should say it is incredibly hard to use the immune system to tamper with a person's fertility. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, even if you're trying to do it deliberately. There are instances where people can't get pregnant because of immunologic factors, but in general, the reproductive organs are what's known as an immunoprivileged site. It's very hard for the immune system to even get there because from an evolutionary perspective, those are such important structures because you need to be able to pass on your progeny that you really work very, very hard to prevent any kind of issues there.
Wow. What about male fertility? I seem to remember hearing some stories about, we were finding that men who had COVID, they were finding evidence of it in their semen. Was it like months later? It was. Granted, this is for really having COVID, unusual. Not the vaccine.
Yes. So that's actually not that unusual. We didn't really start to pay attention to that kind of thing until Ebola, because we started to wonder about sexual transmission for Ebola, but it doesn't seem to be a very uncommon thing for a lot of viruses, but we just don't really have a lot of data at this point. I know of one small study that did show that having COVID-19 actually can adversely affect male fertility, but it was a very small study, so I'm not totally confident about like extrapolating those data to the general population. It could be an issue with that particular subset of individuals, but in general, it would be very, very hard and very, very weird for a vaccine to have any kind of effect on fertility.
Interesting. And it's important to remind people that when we're talking about getting the vaccine, it's not a choice of like getting the vaccine or not getting anything. It's like getting the vaccine or potentially getting COVID. Right. You know what I mean? And when you compare it to that, like we know what COVID does to people. COVID can have a very negative effect on your body for what
we don't even know how long.
It could be long-term effects with COVID. So it's like, what are the long-term effects of the vaccine? We don't necessarily know that yet, but they appear to be much safer than the long-term effects of getting the virus.
Much slower. Yeah.
I think the problem is though that some people are thinking, well, maybe I can just wait and let everybody else get vaccinated. I'll just lay low. It's not affecting my life to hibernate. I'll wait till there's herd immunity and then I don't have to either get COVID or the vaccine and I can avoid both. Is that an okay strategy if somebody really just wants to lay low and doesn't want to participate in the vaccination?
I think it raises some ethical questions, to be honest. But beyond that, at the rate that COVID-19 is surging, it is going to take quite a bit of time before vaccine uptake gets to a level that it's going to start to reduce incidence. So I really don't think that's a viable strategy. You're going to be waiting for a very, very long time if you try that.
How long do you think that's going to take for the vaccine to start having an effect on the spread of the virus? Because we're not seeing it yet. We're still surging. We're still peaking. We hope we're peaking.
Right. I don't think we're peaking anytime soon, to be honest with you. But,
no.
It's really, really hard to answer. It depends entirely on how well we do the vaccine rollout. And I mean, that's about to change, hopefully for the better, because we're getting a new administration, which is going to run things differently. There are so many logistical issues that haven't been considered in advance, which has been really disappointing. And also manufacturing issues. It's looking like we don't have the amount of doses that we expected to have at this point. And now we're running into issues about, well, do we want to give everyone the first dose and make them wait until we have more of the second dose? Or do we want to get at least some people fully vaccinated and then start delivering more doses? It's all really challenging considerations. I think we should see a reasonable slowing of cases, hopefully by the time we get to about 50% vaccine uptake, but that could, that's mostly a guess.
Interesting. Interesting. So what time frame do you think that would be? Like by March, April, we'll start to see.
I love that you're so optimistic that you think that that's going to happen like before the summer.
I'm ready to get back to work, man. I'm ready to get back out into the world. We've been hibernating. It's not fun. It's not fun.
No one likes this.
If we're ready, I'm just going to jump right in. This is my take on why everybody should get vaccinated, because I want to freaking get back to work. I want to go back into the world and do awesome stuff. It's been so much fun this year doing this podcast in this room with no walls, but hibernating for over a year. No, stop. Hibernating for over a year is miserable. We have so much cool stuff to do in the world, and all it takes is, I mean, it would have been nice if people wore masks and socially distanced, but all it takes is getting the vaccine.
Started that.
Get out and get the vaccine. All right. Anyway, let's get back to the questions with our expert here.
John just really misses going to parties, but not nearly as much as I do.
Come on.
I've gotten a bunch of people asking me, like, if I get vaccinated and I complete the series and my friends are all getting vaccinated, can I go and have a party with them? And like, we're all vaccinated, should be fine, right? And I really hate to tell them, like, well, actually,
yeah.
So just to answer that one, we don't really know. The reason that we don't know is because it's not clear right now whether or not a person who has been vaccinated can be an asymptomatic carrier and then spread that to other people. So the answer I've been telling them is that would be fine if you're willing to quarantine for 2 weeks after the party.
Oh, Lord. So we're in for another year of this.
Yeah.
Based on that.
Easily.
That's terrifying.
Easily.
It'll take a while. The Biden administration seems to want 100 million doses in 100 days. My infectious disease epidemiologist friends are like, it's going to need to be like 100 million doses in about 45 days if we really want to crush this.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's get back to the fears. How many people have died from taking the COVID vaccine?
As far as I'm aware, 0.
Well, I mean, it just got rolled out. So far, none.
Wait, I need to hear a clear answer on that again. What was the number?
So far 0. There are a few deaths in association with the vaccine that are under investigation, but I'm inclined to think that they're coincidental. So, for example, one question I've been getting specifically, the media is like covering every single adverse drug reaction. It's driving me nuts because like it's not like they're covering every single death from COVID. But anyway, there was a doctor in Miami, an OBGYN, who took the Pfizer vaccine. And tragically, he ended up dying of a condition called immune thrombocytopenia, which is basically where the immune system directs an inappropriate response against platelets. And in his case, it caused a total inability to clot his blood. He had a stroke, bled into his brain, and died. And it's very tragic. And the reason I don't think that the two are likely related, and again, it's still under investigation, is because one of the key things that was reported was he developed these skin lesions called petechiae, which are these like microscopic hemorrhages that you get when your platelets get very, very low. But they happen 3 days after he got the vaccine. And that is too fast for an immune response. Yeah. It would take you at least a week for if the vaccine were responsible for an inappropriate immune response against his platelets, that would take at least a week to start. And I'm not sure how quickly it would take for his platelets to drop to a level where you would see those kinds of lesions, but I don't think it would be immediate like that. So it's very sad and it's still being investigated, but we just don't know. And the other one I've gotten, the other question is those elderly long-term care residents in Norway. I think now the number's like up to 30. They received the vaccine and then some of them died. But right now, it's not above what the background rate is. In a week, you'd expect 400 people in that cohort to die due to random chance. And I think it doesn't really change much because the elderly in particular, especially those in close quarters, like in long-term care facilities, are at such high risk of COVID that they absolutely have to be vaccinated. There's just no way around it.
That's so interesting. So we're tracking the number of people who take the vaccine and die. And as of yet, there is no evidence that the number of people dying after taking the vaccine is higher than the number of people who would die just in a regular group of people
So the control
not taking
group.
the vaccine.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. It's yes, that's absolutely right. Right now, there have been 0 deaths that have been linked to this vaccine with any kind of certainty.
Well, not just linking it with certainty, but even just looking at the group as a whole, we're not seeing an increase in deaths in the group that is getting the vaccine versus what we would expect to see in any control group of, let's say, a million random people in the population, right? We know that if you take a random sample of 1 million people and you give it a year, we expect to see this number of deaths in that random sample of 1 million people, right? That's a number that we can generate.
So actually, Dr. Bob Wachter at the University of California, San Francisco, has a really good slide on this where he showed if we vaccinate 10 million people over the next few months, we can expect that 4,025 will have a heart attack, 3,975 will have a stroke, 9,500 of them will develop a new diagnosis of cancer, 60 will be diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, 14,000 of them will die. But again, these numbers are based on average risk across the U.S. population. If you consider who's getting the vaccine right now, like the elderly, their risks for these conditions is much, much higher. So these numbers are actually an underestimate of what you would expect by random chance to happen.
And that's the thing that people, I think, just don't have a fundamental understanding of when it comes to science, is that any random sampling of the population is going to have adverse events happen to them. Now you take a random sampling of the population and you administer a vaccine to them, you're still going to have those adverse events happening. The problem is the people who have those, who know people who have those adverse reactions spread those stories and they immediately attribute it to the vaccine because as far as they're concerned, they went their whole life and then boom, they get this vaccine and boom, here's this adverse reaction. It's obviously correlated. But when the science doesn't work like that, you can't draw conclusions from individual samples like that. You have to sample a large population and then you have to compare it to what you would expect would happen just on any given day with that large population. And that's something that's just very fundamentally difficult for people who aren't engaged in science and don't understand science and don't study it and don't spend time with it. It's very difficult for people to understand that, I think. And that's part of the problem that we end up fighting back against. So yeah, that's interesting.
For sure.
So there's no fear yet at this point that there's an increased risk in death from taking the vaccine. What's the increased risk in death from not taking the vaccine and just getting COVID?
I mean, isn't it like an 8% chance? Like
I don't know, but it's non-zero. Don't just go and get COVID, guys.
Well, so the biggest determinant of risk right now seems to be people's age. And for whatever reason, younger people in particular don't really see it as a big risk to them. They don't really think, a lot of them don't seem to think it's a really big deal. And some of them are starting to be kind of lax with their public health precautions. But there was actually a really good meta-analysis that was done that actually compared risks in terms of their annual risk of a fatal car accident, basically. So like that's not a terribly common thing, but it's not terribly rare. So it gives people some ideas. So in those up to the risk ranged in younger adults being defined as 35 to 65, if I remember correctly, to being between 2 and 101 times higher than their annual risk of a fatal heart attack, or a fatal car accident, excuse me. That was their risk of death from COVID-19. If you look at the actual percentages by age, in those 85 and older, it's about 30%, their odds of dying. And that does not consider, again, any risks of morbidity, any long-term health issues that they may develop. And what's especially concerning regarding younger adults is that there seems to be kind of a demographic shift going on where COVID-19 is disproportionately starting to affect them. And as a result, these ICUs that have the sickest patients, a lot of them are younger than 50. A lot of them are younger than what you would expect for a disease that is overwhelmingly fatal to the elderly.
Wow.
It's not a joke.
Yeah, it's amazing that, what is it now, 3,000 to 4,000 deaths a day we're seeing. We're seeing around 200,000 new cases a day. And yet people want to sit here and, be afraid of a vaccine that is being administered to millions of people with zero indication of any increase in death amongst the population that's getting vaccinated compared to this regular sample of population. And people want to sit here and say the vaccine is more dangerous than COVID itself. It's really preposterous. It's quite phenomenal.
I think right now it's really important to have empathy for people who might be anxious about the COVID-19 vaccine, in particular, if you consider it from the perspective of someone who's from a community of color. It's really easy to understand why they would be unwilling to take this pharmaceutical, right? Because from the outside looking in, it seems like it was rushed. It's been less than a year. Before this, the fastest we'd ever made a vaccine was 4 years, and that was an era with much laxer pharmaceutical regulations. And on top of that, like from the perspective of these communities, they certainly have good cause to be distrustful of the government, of medical institutions. And that, I think, actually is especially concerning. I'm not quite sure what I can do to reach them. I think that it really needs to be a voice from within their community that advocates for it.
Absolutely. And I think it might be worth elaborating just a little bit on why people of color might be hesitant to get the vaccines, because not everyone realizes why people of color, especially the African-American community, would be hesitant. And it's because historically, there have been a lot of medical trials that have been performed on people of color against our will. Birth control was tested on women of color, specifically Black women, against our will. And so, you know, jumping in to something such as like a vaccine where people of color, especially Black Americans, have been used as guinea pigs for something like a vaccine historically, you know, generationally is going to make a lot of people very distrustful. But I think it is worth pointing out that this is one of the first vaccines that has been tested in a lot less of racist context than previous medical things.
I think that the trials did overall a very good job of being representative of the population in terms of their composition. There were slightly fewer Black people, including the trials, and then overall proportion in the U.S. But the things to keep in mind also is that these trials weren't just done in the U.S. Like the Pfizer vaccine had multiple trials, like in Germany and in other countries as well. So it's hard to really achieve a perfect representation of everyone under those circumstances because the demography of those places is going to be different.
But I do think it is worth pointing out that like this is one of the first vaccines that's being created that is being created with that in mind, that like previous times that the medical community has looked at cures, it hasn't done so in the most inclusive of ways.
And when it comes to the actual rollout of the vaccine, it's not just being rolled out in certain communities. It's being rolled out everywhere that they can get it. But the problem is, I think maybe some people in some communities don't necessarily know that. They don't, you know, they don't see the rollout happening in other places, and maybe they don't trust the media to tell them truthfully. So they feel like we're just being told that it's being rolled out everywhere. How do we know it's not just being tested in our community first to make sure that people aren't going to die? You know what I mean? And I think that's part of the problem. And that's a bigger problem of, you know, just developing more trust in institutions and in the media. And that's just going to take time, you know, because we haven't done a good job of that in the past.
Yes,
so hopefully through this kind of action, we can help to dispel that. But
yeah, I think rebuilding that trust will probably take decades. Unfortunately, we probably don't have that kind of time to restore relations with these communities. But I mean, not only is it in their best interest, I think, and I think it's especially hard because these communities are at disproportionately high risk for severe COVID-19, for fatal COVID-19. And here we have something that is amazingly effective at preventing them from becoming sick with COVID-19, and to have them not take it, that's a tragedy. But beyond that, it goes back to what we talked about earlier about how 91% vaccine uptake across the country is not enough. We could have those pockets of 40% or 20%. And they will ensure that the disease keeps circulating. They will ensure that people keep getting sick.
Do you think that we're going to have to continue vaccinating people after COVID becomes less? Like, are we going to eradicate COVID with the vaccine, or is it something that's going to stay with us because we're never going to have full, you know, vaccination?
We are absolutely not ever going to be able to eradicate COVID-19. And the reason for that has to do in part with the definition of eradication, which a lot of people get wrong. So in general, eradication means that there are no cases of the disease anywhere in the world. And often the goal, at least on national level, is elimination, which means that there is no endemic transmission of the disease. You can have cases and still have the disease be eliminated, but they all have to be imported in. Because SARS-CoV-2 is a zoonotic pathogen, it comes to us from animals, it will continuously be reintroduced into the population, which means that we will not be able to stop vaccinating for it. It may get to a point where we are able to eliminate it, where the incidence is negligible or even zero if vaccination uptake gets high enough. But I don't see any reasonable point in the future where we can totally stop, unless maybe if we somehow perfect a super ultra broad spectrum universal coronavirus vaccine. In that circumstance, maybe. but that seems doubtful.
So we're going to be vaccinating for COVID for years to come.
At least a generation or two.
Probably forever.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. Wow. All right.
Welcome to your new reality.
Seriously. I noticed you had a link to an article on your website about how pandemics are going to continue to be a problem for humanity. Mm-hmm. Why is this some new reality? Like, we haven't really had a serious pandemic like this since, 100 years ago.
Yep.
What was the last one?
The Spanish flu of 1819. But
1918.
1918, sorry. My dyslexia is fucking up again. There was also a pandemic in 1820s, but that's different pandemic.
So is this something we have to worry about every 100 years?
Seems like
why
it.
Is this a problem, and why can't we anticipate these things or identify? Why couldn't we find SARS-CoV-2 before it spread in the human population? Like, where are these things coming from, and why do we have to expect that they're going to continue to show up?
Well, I mean, we did find SARS-CoV-2 before it spread. The problem was we just stopped doing it.
No, I mean before it even spread, like in China. Like, I'm talking, like, why didn't we know about it 10 years ago if it existed in the animal population?
I'm not sure it existed 10 years ago, to be honest with you. I don't know. I don't know if it would have existed 10 years ago. I don't know quite enough about the rate at which coronavirus has evolved to know that. But a big issue is, in part, it's driven by climate change. In part, it's driven by industrialization. We're encroaching on certain wildlife habitats, and these animals are often reservoirs for various pathogens. Bats are extraordinarily good reservoirs for a lot of viruses because they can be infected by many viruses without actually getting sick because their immune system has some special quirks. But as we continue to encroach on wildlife habitats, as climate change worsens and forces these animals out of their natural habitat, as we continue to have these kinds of encounters, as we have factory farming, that kind of thing, we're going to see more of these.
Makes sense.
SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, it might not be the big one.
Oof. I've heard people talk about it as being actually a good training virus, in the sense that it's not as deadly as some viruses like Ebola, for example, but it spreads really well. So that forces us to have to develop systems to deal with it and not just put our heads in the sand like some people want to do. Wow. What could we do better? What are we learning from this pandemic? What are we going to have to change to be able to, next time something like this comes around, not have it spread as fast or be as bad as COVID ended up being? One
thing that would have been tremendously useful was to have ready a broad spectrum antiviral that worked against coronaviruses. And the major reason we didn't have that is because no one really wanted to fund basic science research into coronaviruses. So I think that there needs to be a massive infusion of cash, basically, into the sector, into the science sector, in particular emphasizing basic science research, not just the clinical side of things, like the clinical trials. I think that would be a really good starting point. I think that we need to better support our public health infrastructure. Public health is a really tricky thing because when you're doing like the best job possible, it doesn't look like anything, right? Because nothing's happening.
Yes.
Right.
So I hope that this renews a kind of interest and faith in public health and how important it is in our society. I think that would be an excellent starting point. I think that more detailed commentary is probably outside of my expertise.
Fair enough. It's sad to say, but I think that probably the thing that's going to maybe make people take this more seriously in terms of preparing for the future is the economic effects that it had. Had it not had a huge economic effect on the world, I think people would be able to come up with stories that we heard that, people
maybe
die.
It wasn't so bad. Yeah.
People die, and the people that are dying are old people, and they only had a few years left anyway. So the total number of years being removed by this virus is negligible. It's not worse than the flu. All these other things that we're hearing. That people are so
comment,
good.
Though, I have to say, the comment about like they were old, so like they didn't have that many years anyway. I find that to be so hypocritical because that's what they say when they die of COVID-19. Then you have this thing in Norway where no definitive links to the vaccine, just a temporal association. Oh my God, the vaccine is poison. It's killing all our old people. Like, when have you ever really shown that you cared about the lives of these elderly people?
Fair enough.
Because it wasn't through your actions.
Fair enough. But it does seem that people are really able to come up with good stories to avoid dealing with the suffering and the death of people around them so that it doesn't force them to have to change their behavior because they think that it's not going to happen to them. And that's part of what contributes to something like this spreading as fast as it did. Yeah. But I think when it comes to the economic effects, people in power generally want to avoid that kind of economic shutdown. There becomes a big incentive in the marketplace to avoid these kinds of things. And hopefully that's going to inspire governments to take note, to actually keep their pandemic response teams employed, even if we haven't had a pandemic for a while, and hopefully to fund more of the basic science. I think that you're absolutely right about that the more we can understand about the basic science, the more quickly we'll be able to respond to whatever new viruses or I don't know, what else do we have to worry about? Bacteria, microphages. What?
Yeah, bacteria. We also fungi. Actually, there have been in ICUs some outbreaks of Candida auris after patients get COVID-19, and that is a really nasty fungus. It has resistance to like everything. That's also actually another really big problem, antimicrobial resistance. We desperately need more new classes of antibiotics, and we need better antibiotic stewardship.
Yeah. Yes. Do you know the channel Kurzgesagt on YouTube?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. Phenomenal animation channel that covers topics like this with this beautiful kind of like children-like animation, but serious topics like macrophages and how bacteria are becoming immune and they're going to take over the world. And they're done so well. And I really can't recommend them enough for people who, want to get a really quick understanding of why bacterial resistance to antibiotics is a huge problem that we need to face down in the future. Yeah. So there's a lot of work to be done, and hopefully people are incentivized better today than we were a year ago. What has this been like for you? So you started on in the comment section. You now have this blog. You're very active on Twitter. What has the feedback been for you? What has your experience been like since you've really gotten involved in this advocacy?
That's kind of a hard question. I don't really know. I now get random messages from strangers asking me about COVID-19 and vaccines, and that's new. That didn't happen before the pandemic, and I don't mind that. I actually think it's really nice. Some people have been nasty. I make a lot of chiropractors really mad. For some reason, it's always the chiropractors.
What is the correlation? What is the connection between chiropractors and anti-vaccine status? I notice it's a pretty strong connection.
They're fake doctors.
Basically, they're not a scientific profession. I don't know, like their belief system is basically founded on this guy who apparently had a vision from a ghost, and the ghost told him that all disease is caused by subluxations, and if you like manipulate people's joints basically and their spine and stuff, you will cure all disease. Needless to say, the evidence supporting that is quite lacking. But these people aren't exactly known for their attention to scientific rigor, and a lot of them tend to be anti-vaccine. One of their major organizations has actually like a 1,200 page document of basically a bunch of anti-vaccine nonsense. It's been a while since I looked at it. I don't know. But a lot of them tend to be very anti-vaccine, quite baselessly.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. It's a challenge. What do you think we can all do to be better advocates for science and vaccines and research-based approach to decision making?
I think one really simple thing people can do is just to share vaccine positive messages. So for example, when you go get your vaccine, just like a quick selfie, like I got my vaccine, I feel fine, or like however you're feeling, don't lie about it if you're not feeling well. But don't over exaggerate either. Like I had some people on my feed who were basically like complaining after they got the vaccine for the second dose. They were like, "Oh my God, it literally feels like I'm dying." And I'm like, really?
Does it? Does it literally feel like you're dying? Literally?
Talk to somebody who had COVID. That feels like dying from what I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, like, sure. Like, I think we also have to be transparent. Like these vaccines, the mRNA vaccines are what are called reactogenic. They cause a very strong immune response, and that can feel pretty sucky. Right. And, you should expect to like be down for a day or two, at most 3, but probably not more than that. Even 3 would be like kind of pushing it.
Right.
But just like simple things like being positive about vaccines, sharing when you got a vaccine, sharing every time that, you got a vaccine and you're okay. Like, this is the thing, like those scary stories on the internet, right? Where like, I got a vaccine, my child was never the same again. That's because like one of the reasons that they seem like such a big deal and seem so much more common than they are is because no parent goes and gets their child vaccinated and then says, hey, what's his face got a vaccine and they're doing great. Nothing happened. They're now protected against this disease.
Right. If people actually saw those posts every day from the millions and millions and millions and millions of people and children who are getting vaccinated every day with zero adverse effects, then it might drown out the few cases. But those few cases, of course, are what people notice. When it comes to the actual individual vaccines, there is a difference in the efficacy rate. If you're being offered the vaccine that is less effective or less efficacious, I forget which one it was. Was it the Pfizer or the Moderna? Do you remember in terms of
what you're talking about? Moderna's was more effective at preventing severe COVID-19. Pfizer's was more effective at preventing more COVID-19 of any severity overall.
Ah, gotcha.
Interesting. Because I know that some people have been debating, like, which one should I get? And if you're being offered one and that's not the one that you want to get, or you think it's maybe less effective, and you want to get the other one, is it bad to wait? Should you just get any vaccine that's being offered to you?
You should choose your vaccines like you should choose your favorite beer. The best beer is the one that is in front of you.
Yep.
There's the quote.
Yeah.
We're leading with that.
The differences in these vaccines in terms of their efficacy is so marginal that it is irrelevant. It could entirely be the result of statistical artifact. There was literally one severe case of COVID-19 in the Pfizer vaccine trial, as opposed to zero in Moderna's. That literally could be entirely random chance. I don't know if you have like specific concerns because you have a unique medical situation. Definitely talk to your care team first about whether or not one makes more sense than the other. There are some slight differences in the immune response that each vaccine produces. But in terms of what we care about in terms of preventing COVID-19, it really doesn't matter. With any vaccine, even if it's less effective, you are going to get a much bigger public health gain if you can vaccinate a huge portion of the population with a less effective vaccine than a very effective vaccine for a small proportion of the population.
Gotcha.
Right. In other words, the more people that get vaccinated, the better it is for everyone, even if that vaccine is less effective than some other vaccine that might be available but isn't being offered to you. Yeah, so that's so important. So yeah, we need to get to that herd immunity. We need to get everybody vaccinated so we can get back out and having fun in the world.
You want to get back to parties. Get your fucking vaccines.
Seriously, you're going to have to come party with us in Brooklyn when this thing's over. We're throwing a big one.
Oh my
COVID
God.
is over party. March 15th. What do you think? Can we make it?
I swear to God, I will start doing this show from home if you do that shit in March.
Oh my God. Well, Edward, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. What are your goals for the blog going forward? You know, COVID is hopefully not going to be here forever. Do you see yourself staying involved in vaccine advocacy work? Do you see yourself taking, your interests in other directions? Where do you see yourself going with this?
I think I'll definitely continue to blog about vaccine stuff and the immune system, just because that's an area that's really ripe for a lot of misinformation. One of the reasons that I started out with vaccines in particular is just because I'm a really big advocate of evidence-based medicine, and there is perhaps nothing in the literature that has as much evidence that shows it's unequivocally good as vaccines. They're some of the best studied things in all of medicine, but there are a lot of choices that people make based on bad premises, and I don't think that autonomy can be practiced from a place of false premises.
That makes sense. So education at the end of the day is the most important thing.
Informed consent.
Yeah, like for example, I have a post all about vitamin K. For anyone who wants to read it, it's more detailed and less gentle than a lot of my other posts, because that one was actually requested not so much for like parents who aren't sure about whether or not to give their child the vitamin K shot at birth, but people who are advocating for vitamin K. So I went into more detail there.
Gotcha.
Is that something we should continue to supplement later in life?
Not really. It's not really an issue past birth. The thing that happens at birth, so vitamin K doesn't really cross the placenta at all. So every single child is born deficient in vitamin K. Normally you can get it from your diet, or it's produced by bacteria in your gut, but because newborns don't have their gut seeded with anything, they can't make it. So it's given within 24 hours of birth to prevent bleeding because of vitamin K deficiency. But in general, if you have a normal diet, you should be fine. Some people can temporarily develop a deficiency after antibiotics because they can kill off the bacteria that make it in their gut. But it's really not like a big public health issue.
Antibiotics, don't take them like candy. They are not good for you unless you really need it.
Not Skittles.
Yes.
Not Skittles.
Anyway, for people who want to learn more, people who maybe are on the fence, people who want to educate themselves, where do they start? Where do you send them?
The Children's Hospital of Philadelphia has a vaccine education center. I think that is a really excellent starting point for a lot of people. Everything
is that online or is that in person?
Yes, it's online. It's online. It is all written in very plain language. It's very easy to understand. It has references for all of its claims that you can check if you feel skeptical or want to know more. I think that's a really good starting point. Vaxopedia.org is also really, really good. Similar thing, plain language summaries by a pediatrician. Very short articles, but with lots of references that you can check out for more details. If you're looking for specific anti-vaccine claims, Skeptical Raptor is a really good site. Science-Based Medicine is really, really good. ScienceBasedMedicine.org.
Perfect.
Amazing. We're going to have to throw all those links in the description, so we'll have to get a list from you at the end.
Sure.
Yeah.
I have a list on my blog, actually, of other sources that people can look to.
Then let's just link to that.
Yeah, that's easier.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
And where can people find you? Where would you like to be found?
So I'm on Twitter, and as of recently, I'm also on Instagram at Deplatform Disease. My Twitter is at Nirenberg, like my name.
Perfect.
Awesome. And we'll link both of those as well. And your blog, of course, is Deplatform Disease. Deplatforming?
No, just Deplatform.
Deplatformdisease.com. Edward Nirenberg, It has been such a pleasure chatting with you about this super important topic right now. We can't stress enough how important it is for people to take this vaccine seriously and get in line, get vaccinated as soon as you can, and talk to your friends about it, talk to your community about it. Really spread the word about how people are getting vaccinated. They're not dying. And the more people can see that, I think the more reassured they will be. And hopefully, they'll start to see that it's less of a fear than sitting around waiting to get COVID. So
right.
Thank you for everything that you're doing to help spread this information and making this information available to us. Your blog has been very useful to me in my research and trying to understand this so that I can also help hopefully be an advocate for this as well. So thank you again for taking the time to come and talk to us. And thanks for all the work that you are doing.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
And when this is all over, party in Brooklyn. Get ready.
Okay, sounds good.
You're invited to the post-COVID party. Hopefully this year.
We'll see. I don't think.
Oh no!
Have a great one.
That's a really good thing to look forward to, though. Actually, all those post-COVID parties that we're going to be able to have once everything is under control. We can have like the party to end all parties to account for all the ones that we couldn't have.
We are going to have an orgy that makes ancient Rome and ancient Greece look mild by comparison.
Are we going to live stream this?
I mean, not without the consent of everyone involved.
Are you familiar with Andrew Yang?
The presidential candidate?
He's running for mayor of New York, and part of his platform is to throw a huge post-COVID party. So he's getting my vote.
I love how you go from like orgies to Andrew Yang. That was one hell of a transition.
He's going to be the party man in chief. He's on my page about throwing post-COVID parties.
Not sure about the optics of a politician recommending an orgy since Caligula.
Right. I hope that he's really not recommending an orgy so much as like, hey, let's all hang out and have a dance party. I'm fine with him recommending a dance party.
Like a huge citywide party. I'm ready for it. We're going to have
hang out in Central Park.
You know how we have like VE Day or something like Victory in Europe Day and D-Day and Memorial Day? I wonder if we're going to have like a COVID is over day. I
mean, we sure had Trump is over day in New York when the presidency was called.
Really loud.
What was that like in Staten Island? Because Staten Island leans a little bit more pro-Trump, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say, that day I went all the way from Greenpoint down to Diker Heights, and Diker sits right on the border where, I forget that neighborhood, but it's like actually a really Trump neighborhood in Brooklyn, like South Brooklyn. And so because they're just like right there, going from like biking from Greenpoint down to South Brooklyn that day, I had to like wade through so many parties in North Brooklyn, and the further south I got and the closer I got to Diker, the quieter it got, to the point where it almost got eerie, where it was like, y'all forgot things happened. Oh, y'all didn't even know down here.
Or they were laying low.
Yeah.
I mean, people have really not been taking certain parts of this year well. There was a bar owner here who was told, I think, by the state that he had to close because he just like was not respecting COVID precautions, basically.
Right.
And eventually he refused to comply, and he was jailed for it. And there was a giant protest. People were yelling, "No masks." It was bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's been quite an interesting mix of reactions, and it's been really interesting to watch how people have dealt with this, and unfortunately how it's come down on political divide.
I think that has been one of the major failures. A lot of issues that should never have been political became political.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. The election played a huge role in that. And fortunately, now we're moving on to the next phase where it seems like there's less pushback from one side of the political spectrum, because the election's not happening anymore. So hopefully that will help contribute to people taking this seriously this year. And this will be the year that we eradicate, or we get over COVID. So fingers crossed.
That's the hope.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Edward. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for checking out this clip from our show.
To watch more clips or full episodes, click on our profile below.
If you want to stay up to date on all of our new episodes and videos, click subscribe.
And if you have any ideas for future guests or topics that you would like to see us cover on the show,
leave us a message in the comments or connect with us on any of our social media channels at Funtime Program.
Or on our website at funtimeprogram.com.
We'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.